Hello, everyone. This is David from Ahead of the Game with Rick and David and our special guest, Steve Brossman. Hello, Steve, and hello, Rick.
G'day, Steve.
G'day, guys, and hello to all of you fantastic people tuning in.
Yes, and welcome to our lovely guests. Thank you also. And look, I just want to get the ball rolling first of all, Steve. How did you get involved in talking about podcasting and podcasts? What was the spark that got the whole thing going for you?
Look, I've always been a fan. Look, we've been friends for 16 years. We were just chatting about it then, and a very strong background in video marketing. And when podcasting came about, I dabbled in having my own podcast, but it was when I decided to move my main business from Australia to America via the Zoom chair. And it was through just some networking. I actually met one person. They invited me to an online networking event. They invited me to be a guest on a podcast. And then it was through being a guest on podcasts that I actually grew my business from 0 to 6 figures in just 10 months.
Wow.
And I thought there's a lot of power in this.
Yeah.
And over the next 4 years, every year since, I've been generating 6 figures just from being a podcast guest. And I just kept doing it, expecting that's what everybody else was doing. So it was a little bit later on that I actually got into teaching other people how to do it. And we'll chat about that shortly.
Yeah, look, I'm just wondering, what are some of the mistakes that you see a lot of pod guests or even podcast hosts do from your perspective as to why they don't make money out of what they're doing?
We got 4 days to talk about this, or you?
I'm after the abridged version, Steve. Look.
Okay, look.
Back again, that's for sure.
There's two really big ones, and we'll go backwards and forwards chatting about each of these. The first one is they believe what they're already currently taught. Most of the people are teaching out there now. Share your story, share your expertise, and give them a link to go somewhere.
Right, and that's it.
Yeah, and that's the big thing, and that throws them down the route of what we call be the prize, not the professor. And when I was doing the research as to why people are struggling, I was listening to so many podcasts, and it really was just trying to get as much information in as possible so they had people think that they're smart and not really engaging with the people.
Uh-huh. And you mean as in they're voluminous with all of their knowledge, but there's no real story pattern to it that leads to, hey, here's a way how to deal with me if you want to actually use some of that knowledge for yourself?
Yeah, well, another thing that we do, and I know your people out there will know very quickly that I love alliteration, and I teach people how to. Your job as the guest is to excite the audience about the possibility of implementing whatever it is you're talking about, not educate them. Because a lot of people are just giving lots of information, but it was like, well, here's some information, and here's what you can do with it. And one of my guests, well, actually, the lady that was the catalyst for all of this to happen, she came to me, she was one of my clients, and said, Steve, we're working together. I'm paying to get on 2 to 3 podcasts per week, and I haven't got a client in the first 3 months. And I looked at what they were doing, and I felt like I was in a room watching 2 people geek out, chatting to each other, having a good time, but the audience wasn't involved.
Oh,
and I thought, aha, okay, you really need to pull the audience in. And for those of your people who are pod guests, I call them, podcast guests, it's a matter of really bringing them in and making them feel comfortable. And we tweaked it, turned it around, and in the next 2 podcasts that she was on, she got 2 high-level clients over $5,000 each, more than she'd ever got before. So it was a matter of, putting this into practice and really engaging with the people.
Is there something to do with what you call a bankable story enmeshed in that?
Yeah, and one of the big things, again, is a lot of people say you got to get out there and tell stories. You got to tell stories to build rapport.
Yeah.
Now, when you tell a story to build rapport, they know about you. And at the end of the story, they've got their arms folded and think, well, that's an interesting story, or they've had an interesting life, or, they're going to clap and walk out the door.
Right.
But when you do a bankable story, you really start relating exactly to the person, potentially the struggles that they're going through. And it's like, well, yep, I went through these struggles. Here's the part of my life that it is triggering them to say, wow, they're just like me. Therefore, they're going to have empathy what I'm doing. Then the next part of that story is, what is it you've done to help other people to give them results? And then the last part of that story is quantifying those results. So at the end of it, the person is saying, wow, it's the when Harry met Sally effect. I'll have what they're having. So you go from, wow, they're just like me, or they've helped people just like me.
Yeah.
They've got a great solution, and damn it, I want it. And when you know how to put that bankable story together, then you're going to excite them to say, that's somebody I want to work with. They can relate to me, but they've got something I want.
What do you think about that, Rick?
Well, you've totally got me. You got me there. But the question, and I think the question I'm going to ask now, which is everybody's going to ask, because everybody gets this wrong. Now that you've got these people and they're with you on the line and on the podcast, and they're totally with you, Steve, now you're coming to the end of the podcast. What do you give people? What's the hook that you give them at the end that keeps that relationship beyond the podcast?
Look, I've got something just for your people, and it's called My Back Pocket Guide. 30, 40 minutes of reading, and it's called The Art and Science of Being a Six-Figure Podcast Guest. And it goes through the ins and the outs of what you should and you shouldn't do. And I'm sure David's going to give the links a little bit later on how they can get it. And they can actually go through everything that we're talking about today and more. It's almost like a seminar in a little book. And they'll be able to click through, watch a video, and know what we're talking about. Now, Rick, what I've just done is what we teach people to do. You don't wait to the end. So we've just talked about something that's of value. The people that are listening, it's for you guys and your people, that they can actually get some really practical information. And they're going to wait to the end and say, I want what they're talking about, because if that's in the guide, I want that. So a lot of people will wait to the end and hope that the host will say, so Steve, how do people contact you? And then they'll say, well, they can find me on Facebook. They can find me on Twitter. They can find me on Threads. They can find me down at the local coffee shop. Here's my website. Here's my handle. Here's my phone number. And here's my mother's maiden name. Yeah. And it's like, what? No.
So what? Yeah.
Yeah. Give the value and excite them again about what they're going to get. And then there's just a very simple, hey, if you want what we're talking about and it's going to make a difference, it's going to be in the show notes. David and Rick are going to look after you. And I've got this gift that's going to make a massive difference.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you say to that, Rick?
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense, because the amount of times I've got on podcasts, and then the host will say, Rick, what email do you want to use? And I'm thinking about 20 different companies I've got with 20 different emails, right? And sometimes I even say, well, where did we send people to last time, right? Because I don't have a process around it, because I don't do a lot of podcasts. But it's one of those things where now that you've explained it, Steve, it makes so much sense, because what you've done is you've made a process out of something that so many people go to podcasts but have no idea. And at the very end, the guest always says, so how do we get hold of you? And you go, well, at bigbadelephant.com or something, right? Which means nothing to people, because they don't know why they're going to go to bigbadelephant.com. So I get it. Yeah, I get it. And something makes sense.
Well,
so I guess the question I'm going to come off the back of that is,
great.
There are now companies that charge you money and say, look, we will get you on podcasts, just pay us a whole bucket load of money. Now, Steve, in the real world, is that a good investment for people to spend their money on?
Well, the very clear answer to that is it depends. It depends on what the podcast is, who it is, but more importantly, who the audience is, because it's the audience that's going to end up paying you money sooner or later, or not. See, the podcast itself is actually the catalyst to do things. Now, a lot of the time, it's the conversation with the host. And I've got a program called Podcast Profits, and we spend 2 weeks on the pre-chat call on how to excite the host. Now, you might excite the host, and all they do is they are so pumped to have you on that they'll do more promotion. They might be just so pumped to have you on that they'll give you the best intro possible, and the energy through the call is through the roof, which affects the audience, and they deliver a great podcast. But if you choose the audience right and the host right and have a good pre-call, they may say, so Rick, I love what you're saying. I love how you work with people. I think there might be something else we can do more than doing a podcast. Now, just at December, I had a pre-chat call. We got that excited. We did a workshop together. They were affiliate for me for one of my other programs. And the pre-call actually made me $18,000 before we even recorded the podcast.
Wow.
And so it's not just about getting on, spruiking that you're intelligent. Go and get my book and download it. Hop into my funnel, get on your knees, put your hands together and look skyward, because that's really all that's going to happen. If you've got the real marketing intention of an expanded way of leveraging a podcast, then you're going to make significant money. If you're just saying, I just want to get out there and share my message and hope somebody will click on a link somewhere, then it's really not going to happen.
In other words, hope is a strategy.
One of the things that comes to mind, Steve and Dave, I used to run a podcast, very popular some years ago. The biggest problem I had was I could find lots of people with knowledge, but they just weren't good talent. And so I could put them on a podcast and they knew every word in the encyclopedia, but everybody would be asleep within 5 minutes. And I realized finding good talent for a podcast is not always that easy.
Absolutely. And they fall into the first category of, if I spruik that I'm really knowledgeable, sooner or later somebody will think, oh, I've got to work with them. But if they're that boring, it's not going to happen. And in our training, look, here's what we do. I know you're a sports fan. We tell people that a podcast is like a good tennis match.
Okay.
The host will hit the ball over to your net, over your side of the net, and you should hit it back in a good period of time. And then it goes backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And a great podcast is one that goes backwards and forwards. But if the guest is just hitting it back and not getting involved, it's like watching somebody hit the ball against a wall. It's pretty damn boring. But when you get really good and you watch the tennis players, they're guiding the other person to where they want them to go. And a really good quality podcast guest answers the question and still guides the host down the route that they want them to go. So they can almost control the conversation the way that they're actually answering. And that's, as you would know, that becomes a very, very good audience participation, as well as listening to two people have an engaging conversation.
Yeah, that makes some sense, because I once had an interview with someone way back in the early days of my YouTube side of things, and everything was even though I wanted to ask open-ended questions, the person that I was asking only gave very short answers, and that's very hard to deal with. You can't deal with something like that. You also got to have a lot more enthusiasm and maybe facial or hand gestures to show some activity that there's a real person behind there, rather than just merely answering a few questions at an intellectual level. Yeah.
You hit on a really good point.
Like,
sorry, Rick, go on.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of like when you're a small boy and you go out on dates with girls for the first time, and it doesn't matter what question you ask, they always say, good, How was your day? Good. How was school? Good. And you're thinking there's nothing coming out of this. But it's funny because people are thinking right now, Steve, and I know you know this because I did a bit of research before coming on today. Are there enough podcasts out there that I can be a guest on? Do you guys realize there's over 5 million podcasts in the market today?
There's 3.2 active podcasts. That means that have done 10 or more.
Okay.
There's over 150 million in America alone audiences who listen to more than one podcast per week. Now, they're growing that rapidly, and you got to think there's definitely enough out there, but for every podcast, and if you guys are only doing one a month, that's an extra 12 people you're looking for.
We're doing one a week. Yeah.
If you're doing one a week, that one extra podcast requires an extra 50 pod guests.
Yeah.
And so many people saying, Steve, do you have your own podcast? I said, no, I make more money by being a guest. Now, I'll let the audience know that you're not paying me much more than $100,000 to be on this. You don't make money as an appearance fee. You make money by creating the right energy for the host to work with you, for the audience. And this is for your people at home right now.
Yeah.
We talk about the trinity of relationships. There's the relationship that you and I have, the relationship between the host and the guest. And ideally, we've got a good relationship. We're going well. There's the relationship that I've now got with the audience. I'm giving you some tips. I'm giving you this one. We're getting a good relationship. And by speaking directly to you, we've got that surge of oxytocin coming in, that belonging drug. You're feeling as if you're a part of the conversation. But the other one, for those at home that actually do want to get on good podcasts and get great energy and monetize it, you got to realize that there's a relationship that David and Rick already have with you between the host and the audience. And you guys have been around business for ages. They're very smart people, and you've been around podcasts forever. You've got some great knowledge in what this is now. Now, what I've done with you is elevated and edified you in front of your hosts. So that's given you guys a surge of dopamine that, hey, Steve's talking about us. Now, the audience, you haven't had to say anything, and now they realize that, you've been in business, you're very well-respected business people, you're great podcast hosts. They're saying, hey, our people, our hosts, they're elevated out there in the community. So when people know how to look at those three relationships and enhance them, then that's going to enhance the energy, and everybody's going to want it to keep going. Well, if that's not going to happen, let's contact and stay in touch. So let's reach out to the hosts, let's reach out to the guests and continue that relationship. And that's the way you have more people connect with you after an actual podcast.
Right. What do you say to that, Rick?
Well, Steve, let me ask you something.
Yeah, mate.
People were going to go, people were going to go and wanted to be on a podcast. Is there any particular subject matter that is one or two or three subject matters that people are more interested in than any other subject matter? Whether it be dating or how to buy Bitcoin or how to do something like that. Is there any one or two or three hot subjects out there that
there's only one.
Hosts are always looking?
Yep, there's only one subject matter that they're interested in. And you've probably heard of the same radio station, WIIFM.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah,
What's in it for me? The subject matter that they're interested in is the subject matter that they're interested in right now. What is important to me right now? And great point, because a lot of people say, what podcast should I get on?
Yeah.
And we teach people to know who is the audience that you could best add value to.
Yeah, good point.
What podcast do they listen to? And then you work backwards from there. Instead of saying, hey, listen, I want to be on this podcast. It gets X thousand people. But no, you look for the people you can add the best value to as an audience. And then you work backwards from there. And a lot of people say, I want to get on these big podcasts. One lady last year, she said, Steve, I'd love you to be on my podcast. I don't have a really big audience. I don't think I've ever got more than 100 views on any of my podcasts, but they would love what you say. And I looked at who she was and her people. I said, you know what? They need what I say. So we got on and had a pre-chat, and she said, fantastic, let's run a workshop for my people. And then she was affiliate as well. And for somebody who had a podcast of less than 100, within a 3-month period, she'd made me $14,000 working together. So it's the what topic? The topic that you can help the people the most on is what they're interested in, and that's where you start.
Right. So stop chasing the rainbow then. Yeah.
Yeah. You know what? You've also answered the other question, right? Which is, do I start my own podcast as a podcast host, or do I just become a guest on other people's podcasts? Now, unless I've been listening incorrectly, I think the answer to that is self-evident.
Yeah. And look, you guys have got it nailed. You've been experienced podcast hosts before. You've got a good system. Hosting your own podcast is fantastic. However, I'm lazy. I'll admit it. I would rather go and speak to other people's people, and they've done all the hard work. And I'm not just going to go in and rape and pillage, but I'm going to work with how can I add the best value to other people?
Yeah.
And here's something that a lot of people don't think of. How can I make the host look the hero is my job. It's not all about me. How can I add value to the audience? How can I make the host look the hero in front of their people? And if we're to do something together, will my program enhance the results that the host is already getting with their people? Now, I work with speaker coaches, book coaches, course creators, a whole heap of people like that. And in my other work where I do as sales training, and how can my program help them get better results? So if they were to provide it and do a course and I help them sell more, then the host is going to look better because their program is adding more value. So when you tie that together, it makes a massive difference, and you get talked about, and other people will want you on their podcast.
Yeah, so you're talking about the referability element there, Steve.
Absolutely. I had one guy that got that damn excited that he introduced me to 20 other hosts.
Wow, that's impressive.
Wow.
I was like, well, I filled my calendar up. I didn't have to do it. I told you I was lazy. And all I did was, this is a great person, but you treat them with utmost respect. And that lady that had a smallest podcast, I've got a philosophy that everyone that I speak to is a $20,000 call.
Right.
I treat them with that respect. Now, I've had people that I've not earned a cent from.
Right.
But I tell you what, I gave them the respect, I gave them the value, and I gave them my best podcast I could at the time. And they may have referred me on. You never know what's happening in the background. So you always deliver your best. You give the best value, but you treat the host with the utmost respect.
That makes
Steve,
sense. Yeah.
when
Yeah,
you're
mate.
giving, Steve, when
Yep.
you're giving, I guess, as you said, a gift, or you're giving content away to the host's audience, have you found the best format to be either PDF, audio, or video? What medium have you found to be most popular and downloaded, if you like, by the audience?
You may have heard that I mentioned that I have a back pocket guide.
Yes.
I don't have an ebook. I don't have a whatever, but it's a PDF. The truth is it's a PDF. It's got some videos in there. It's whatever you can do to increase the flow of the buyer's energy after the call.
Right.
Now, during the call, hopefully they're excited. They like something that I've said, and they're excited to go to the download. In my back pocket guides, and I called them, I spent a couple of weeks on the title because an ebook is the throwaway piece of rubbish just to get somebody's email address. You can say, hey, I have a free gift for you. You might have noticed I didn't call mine a free gift. I have something special for you guys, and it is. I put a lot of work into it, but it's not a free gift that is a throwaway piece of crap to get your email address so I can spam the hell out of you once we get off the podcast. So it's the energy and the psychology of how you introduce it so that they're excited. And I had one lady who downloaded my guide. She said she tweaked two strategies out of it. And on her next podcast, she signed the host up as a client.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So there's value in what I'm giving your people. But that's the thing is, how does it increase the energy? Within the first 5 lines, there's a click here. Hey, meet Steve. Click here, here's what's in the guide. So we get back to continue that relationship and continue the energy. And partway through the guide, people are clicking out, booking a call and saying, Steve, love what you said. The podcast was great. Your download was awesome. How do we make this happen?
Yeah.
So whatever you want to build, make sure, as I say, continues the energy flow.
Yeah, because I know you mentioned a bit about energy in the call and the energy in doing your master classes and so forth like that. What's the relationship to energy there?
Energy is everything. Energy is the start of energy. And in my new book, Flow Selling, Frequently Leveraged Outcome Wins, is all about the energy flow through the buying cycle.
Right.
Now, everybody knows that people buy on emotion. Emotion comes from the Latin word emotere, which is energy in motion. So as we're doing it here, there might be some energy, some hormones released, the dopamine, the oxytocin, all of those sorts of things are happening, and they're energy in motion flowing through the body. Now, if you don't have any energy and you're not stimulating energy, there is no emotion.
Right.
And for the people to get involved, they think that person has got great empathy for me. He understands, she understands. And wow, they've got some things that I really do want. Then they get excited. That's another energy. So when you can bring that into your conversation, when I talk about energy and emotion, I'm not talking you have to be an ever-ready battery all the time.
Right.
Over the top. It's like, yeah, you can bring it down, and you can really talk to the people at home and get them to understand that you understand them, and you keep that energy flow going. So I was actually just on a very high level sales leadership podcast 2 weeks ago,
right,
talking about that whole energy cycle. And within an hour of the podcast dropping, I had 3 connection requests on LinkedIn. I said, oh, I guess the podcast has just dropped, because it's the energy that you can control and you can help people feel. Because you guys, people hang around with you guys because you got good energy, and people like hanging around. You're smart, you got good energy.
Yeah.
And if you didn't, people wouldn't want to hang around you. So
thank you, Stephen. Flattery will get you everywhere. In actual fact, Dave, I'm just looking at where we are time-wise, and I was just thinking, being ahead of the game, Steve, we're going to bring out the front pocket guide. And and Dave, I'm just thinking, is there anything, I'm looking at time, is there anything we've got closing things we want to discuss with Steve?
Yeah, look, we'll definitely have Steve back again soon. There's no doubt in my mind about that. Look, are there any parting comments that you would like to say, Steve, that are, is it like a burning issue that you would like to, if you had to thump the table, what would you say in passing to people that are going to be pod guests?
Well, the thing is, the value of being a pod guest, a podcast guest. I'll take 30 seconds, if I can, to wrap this all into one, because a lot of people think about social media and the value of it and getting on there and building things organically. If you're on social media, let's just say Facebook, you're on Facebook, you get about 2 or 3, 4 seconds to get somebody's attention. If you're a guest on somebody's podcast, you got 30 minutes at least to form a relationship. On social media, you're jumping up and down saying, hey, look at me. if you're a podcast guest, the host is introducing you as an expert in your area and they're asking you to speak. Yeah, you're invited there. The people can't turn up to listen to the host and they turn up to listen to you. On social media, generally, you're an unwanted intrusion. So where do you think it would be most valuable to spend your time becoming a good quality podcast guest, getting on and getting those half-hour slots to build a relationship, or those 1 hour slots, or beating your head against a brick wall that everybody's complaining about? The algorithm sucks and nobody sees my stuff.
Right.
So when you do it right and you get on and do the right thing by people, you will get on more, you will create more relationships, and your business will go through the roof.
Wow, that's a very compelling reason you've given there to do it right. So thank you very much. Any last parting comment from you, Rick?
No, except Steve, make sure that you leave here because everybody's going to want your back pocket guide. And I know that once everybody looks at our beautiful faces, they're going to be going, now where on the page is that black pocket guide? So we're going to make sure we do that. But Steve, look, thanks for coming on. It's been really quite exciting. Got me excited. I'm probably going to go and buy a bigger laptop. So, you know.
Mate, it was great to talk to you guys.
Yeah, and I'll leave the link in the description box, particularly on the video version of this, and also in the other different places. I'll certainly put that in the case for our upcoming emails as well to the group. And thank you very kindly, Steve, for giving us your time there, all the way from Brossman, Sydney, only just one suburb away from me here in Newport Bay. And Rick, thanks for tuning in from far and away. And we look forward to seeing everyone back again for our next event. And yeah, I'll sign off from here.
Thanks, guys.
Alrighty.
Look forward
Bye,
to
everybody.
working with you again soon. Cheers.